At my daughter's elegant dinner party, she introduced me to her wealthy guests with a casual wave of her hand. "This is Theodore, our caretaker. I allow him to stay here to take care of the children and the housework." The entire room fell silent, everyone looking at me with pitying eyes. But then her boss, the man she was trying to impress, froze. His expensive wine glass trembled in his hand, and he said one sentence that destroyed my daughter's career and exposed 3 years of calculated lies. My daughter was shocked, looking as if she were about to faint. "I'm so glad you're here. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. If that hook struck a nerve, you're not alone. This is a fictional story exploring painful relationship dynamics and the ultimate consequences of family betrayal. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental, but the lesson about boundaries, dignity, and fighting back is genuinely meaningful. Let's begin." I stood in the corner of my own dining room, though Victoria would have violently objected to me calling it mine, holding a silver tray of champagne flutes. The silver cufflinks, Eleanor's last gift to me before she passed, caught the light of the crystal chandelier in a way that felt too fragile, too distant. The laughter of the upper crust, Victoria's country club friends and corporate colleagues, wrapped around me like a glass wall I couldn't break through. I held the tray with the precision of someone who'd done this too many times before, a white cloth draped over my forearm. "This is Theodore, our caretaker." Victoria's voice rang out, sharp and confident, cutting through the polite chatter. She didn't even glance at me when she said it. The entire table nodded absently, treating me as if I were part of the expensive furniture. Kenneth, her husband, smirked and sipped his wine, a bottle of vintage Bordeaux that cost more than the monthly pension they'd been managing for me. But then I caught the eye of a man at the far end of the table. His gaze was stunned, recognizing something that absolutely shouldn't be here. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 years, to the day everything changed. It was a fall afternoon in the Hamptons. The kind of day when the leaves turned that impossible shade of red, and the air smelled like wood smoke and salt from the ocean. Eleanor and I were walking through the garden, behind our estate, the one we'd designed together 25 years ago, back when we were just 2 kids, with a drafting table and a massive dream. She stopped to admire the maples, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "Look at that, Theodore," she said softly. "Isn't it beautiful?" I smiled, looking only at her. "Not as beautiful as you," she laughed. God, I can still hear that laugh. It was the soundtrack to my life for over 40 years. And then her hand tightened on my arm, not in affection, but in sudden sharp pain. "Eleanor." Her eyes went wide, confused, and then she collapsed. Just like that. One moment she was standing beside me, the brilliant, vibrant woman who had been the anchor of my existence, and the next she was in my arms, her breath shallow, her face pale. I shouted for help, fumbled for my phone, called 911, held her as tightly as I could. But it didn't matter. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was gone. A hidden heart condition. The doctors said later. She'd never shown symptoms. She'd never complained. At 57 years old, I became a man without a foundation. I was an architect who'd lost his blueprint. Eleanor had been my partner in everything: business, life, love. We'd built an architectural and real estate empire worth $95 million, from sketches on a cramped kitchen table. We'd raised Victoria together. We'd dreamed together. And now, standing in that garden surrounded by dying red leaves, I felt like the world had been erased. The funeral was a blur. Hundreds of people came: business associates, old clients, friends from the country club, architects I'd mentored. But I barely remember their faces. I only remember standing at the graveside, staring at the polished mahogany casket, thinking with absolute certainty that it should have been me instead. I remember the weight of Victoria's hand on mine. "Dad," she said quietly, her voice breaking perfectly. "Come live with us. Kenneth and I will take care of you. You shouldn't be alone." I looked at my only child, 33 years old, polished and put together in her tailored black dress, her eyes red from crying. She looked so much like Eleanor in that moment that it hurt to breathe. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Of course, Dad, your family will take care of you." I believed her. I needed to believe her. I needed somewhere to go. somewhere that didn't constantly echo with Eleanor's absence. The Hamptons estate suddenly felt like a museum dedicated to a life I could no longer live. So I said yes. I packed up a few things. My clothes, a few cherished photographs, Eleanor's jewelry box and silver cufflinks, and I moved into Victoria and Kenneth's sprawling coastal home. That was my first mistake. For the first few months, it seemed like it might work. Victoria was attentive, Kenneth was polite, giving me space, and their twin boys, Jackson and Noah, just 4 years old at the time, were a bright, chaotic spot in the suffocating darkness of my grief. I helped around the house, played with the boys, tried to be useful. I thought I was healing. I thought I was finding a new normal, but slowly things began to shift. Small things at first, microaggressions masked as requests for help. Victoria would ask me to pick up groceries, then to cook dinner, then to clean up the kitchen after the boys. Kenneth started making passive-aggressive jokes about how lucky I was to have a free place to stay, completely ignoring the fact that I had a massive pension and millions in assets. And I told myself it was fine. I told myself I was contributing, that I was being helpful to my daughter's busy family. I told myself I wasn't a burden. I should have known better. The changes started so slowly, I didn't notice the trap closing around me. That's how the best traps work, isn't it? You don't throw a frog into boiling water. You heat it up 1 degree at a time. By the 4th month, I was beginning to function again. I'd started taking morning walks on the beach, thinking about maybe consulting again, reconnecting with old colleagues from the firm I'd sold. That's when Victoria came to me with a stack of legal papers. "Dad, would you let me handle the bills for you?" she said, setting the documents down on the kitchen table with a deeply sympathetic smile. "You've got enough on your plate: estate taxes, property management, investment accounts. It's a lot. Let me take care of it so you can focus on healing." It made sense. I was exhausted. The grief made paperwork feel like deciphering an ancient language. So, I signed the power of attorney, thinking it was temporary. Thinking she was helping. That was the first brick in the wall I didn't see being built around me. Soon after, Kenneth started filling my wine cellar with bottles of 18-year-old Macallan and 30-year-old Glenfiddich, cases arriving every few weeks. He'd joke about upgrading my collection. He moved his massive gaming setup and leather recliners into my office. The one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. The one where Eleanor and I used to sit together and sketch designs late into the night. He called it his man cave. Now I told myself it was fine. I wasn't using the space anyway. By the end of the first year, I realized I wasn't sitting at the dining table anymore during Victoria's dinner parties. I was in the kitchen, plating appetizers, refilling wine glasses, loading the dishwasher, while her friends laughed in the other room. When had that started? I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. It had just happened. "Theodore, could you grab more ice?" "Theodore, the Hendersons are out of wine." "Theodore, the boys need their baths." Never Dad, always Theodore, like I was staff. By year 2, I'd become entirely invisible in my own home. I was doing laundry, scrubbing floors, driving Jackson and Noah to soccer practice and piano lessons. Victoria's friends would walk past me in the hallway and not make eye contact, as if acknowledging me would be uncomfortable for them. I was part of the furniture, useful but unremarkable. One afternoon, I came back from taking the boys to the park and found all of my things: photographs, Eleanor's jewelry box, my prestigious architectural awards packed into cardboard boxes in the garage. My master bedroom, the beautiful suite Eleanor and I had shared for 2 decades whenever we visited, had been completely gutted and converted into Victoria's walk-in closet. Racks of designer clothes, shelves of red-soled shoes, a vanity mirror, with bright lights like a Hollywood dressing room. "Oh, we needed more space," Victoria said casually when I asked her about it, barely looking up from her phone. "You don't mind, do you? You're barely using that attic room anyway." The attic room. The small guest bedroom with the slanted ceiling and the single window that overlooked the asphalt driveway. That's where I was now, not the master suite, not even a proper guest room. The attic. I stood there, staring at rows of Chanel bags and Louboutin heels where my bed used to be, and I felt something inside me crack. Not break, not yet, but crack. 6 months ago, I was walking past Victoria's study when I heard her on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. The door was open. He's useful, honestly, she was saying, her tone light, almost amused. Free childcare, and he keeps the house spotless. Why wouldn't we keep him? She laughed, a cold, calculating sound that sounded absolutely nothing like her mother. I don't remember walking away. I don't remember climbing the narrow stairs to my attic room. I just remember sitting on the edge of that small, uncomfortable bed, staring at my hands. The same hands that had designed towering skyscrapers, that had held Eleanor as she died, that had built a $95 million empire from absolutely nothing. And now, those hands were scrubbing Victoria's toilets. I thought about the power of attorney I'd signed. I thought about the master bedroom that was now a closet. I thought about Kenneth treating my office like a frat house and my wine cellar like his personal liquor store. I thought about Victoria's laugh on that phone call. Free childcare, keeps the house spotless. Why wouldn't we keep him? I'd spent 2 years telling myself this was temporary, that Victoria was helping me, that I was contributing to the household, that this was what family did when tragedy struck. But family doesn't treat you like hired help. Family doesn't erase you from your own home. Family doesn't laugh to their friends about keeping you around, because you're useful. I stood up and walked downstairs. The house was quiet. Victoria and Kenneth had taken the boys to a birthday party. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them with absolute clarity, as if for the first time. The living room, where I wasn't allowed to sit because the white furniture was, for guests. The dining room, where I served food but didn't eat. The kitchen, where I worked but didn't belong. The office that was no longer mine. The wine cellar stocked with Kenneth's expensive tastes paid for with my money. The master bedroom, my bedroom, Eleanor's bedroom, transformed into a shrine to Victoria's vanity. I ended up standing in the doorway of that walk-in closet, surrounded by designer labels and the faint, overwhelming smell of expensive perfume. This was the room where Eleanor had died in my arms. Not literally, but close enough. We'd spent our last nights together here, talking about retirement plans, about traveling, about finally slowing down. And now it was full of shoes. I felt my patience worn thin over 2 years of slow, methodical erosion finally run dry. It wasn't pain anymore. It was something harder than pain, clearer, colder. It was absolute determination. I wasn't going to be the frog in the boiling water anymore. I was going to get out, and when I did, I was going to make sure the people who put me there understood exactly what they'd done. Victoria thought she'd trapped me. She thought I was broken, defeated, too grief-stricken to fight back. She had absolutely no idea who I used to be, and she was about to find out. The first time I truly saw the depths of what my daughter had become was the night she tried to erase me from the history of my own house. It was a Thursday evening. Victoria was hosting her book club. 8 women from the country club, all designer handbags and expensive highlights, gathered in the living rooms I'd designed with Eleanor back when Victoria was still in elementary school. I was serving tea and finger sandwiches, moving quietly between the chairs like a ghost in my own home. "This estate is absolutely stunning, Victoria, Mrs. Henderson said, gesturing at the vaulted ceilings, the custom millwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows that perfectly framed the ocean view. Victoria smiled, playing the gracious hostess. "Thank you. Kenneth and I bought it 5 years ago. It needed a lot of work, but we've really made it our own." My hand froze mid-pour, the silver teapot hovering over Mrs. Henderson's cup. 5 years ago. 5 years ago, Eleanor was still alive. 5 years ago. This house had been ours for 20 years already. I designed every single inch of it. The curved staircase, the library with the hidden bar, the sunroom where Eleanor grew her rare orchids. I'd spent 2 years working with contractors, architects, and master craftsmen to build this place from the ground up. We'd moved in when Victoria was 7 years old, and she was sitting there, effortlessly lying to her friends, claiming that she and Kenneth had bought it. "Victoria, dear," Mrs. Henderson was saying, completely oblivious. "You have such an eye for design." "Oh, I can't take all the credit," Victoria said modestly, taking a sip of her tea. "We hired an excellent interior designer. She helped us modernize everything." I looked around the room as if seeing it through a stranger's eyes. The walls where our family photographs used to hang pictures of Eleanor and me at our wedding. Victoria's childhood portraits. Snapshots from vacations in Europe were now covered with oversized, sterile abstract paintings, impersonal, cold. The mantel where Eleanor's collection of vintage books had sat was now arranged with geometric sculptures and minimalist vases. They hadn't just redecorated, they had completely erased us. I set down the teapot carefully on the silver tray and walked out of the room. No one noticed. I stood in the hallway, my back pressed against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. This was my house, my blueprints, my vision, and Victoria was rewriting the story, casting herself as the creator and me as a prop. A servant who came with the furniture. That's when I heard Victoria's voice coming from the foyer. Yes, that one. She was saying, "It doesn't fit the aesthetic anymore. Can you have your team move it to storage this weekend?" I walked toward the sound and found her standing with a young woman holding an iPad. The interior designer, I assumed. They were looking at Eleanor's chair, the velvet armchair, in the reading nook by the window. Deep burgundy with carved wooden legs and a high back. Eleanor had given it to me for my 50th birthday, 6 years before she died. She'd had it custom-made, joking that I needed a throne befitting an architectural king. I'd spent countless evenings in that chair, reading, sketching, watching the sunset over the water with her sitting by my feet. "Wait," I said, my voice sharper and louder than I intended. "That chair stays." Victoria turned, her expression briefly annoyed before smoothing into something that might have passed for sympathy if you didn't know her. "Dad, we're updating the space that chair is. That chair was a gift from Eleanor. I know, but Mom's gone and you need to move on." She glanced at the designer, then back at me, her voice dropping to something quieter, infinitely more condescending. "It's been 3 years. Holding on to old furniture isn't going to bring her back." I stared at my daughter, at this woman who looked exactly like the little girl I'd pushed on swings, taught to ride a bike, and proudly walked down the aisle at her wedding. And I didn't recognize her at all. "That chair isn't going anywhere," I said, my tone absolute. "Actually," Victoria said, dropping the sympathetic act entirely. Her tone turned ice cold. "It is. This is my house now, Dad. You signed the power of attorney. Remember? You put me in charge of everything, finances, property management, all of it. So, if I say the chair goes to storage, it goes to storage." The designer looked intensely uncomfortable, her eyes darting between us. "You can keep your books and your photos in your room," Victoria continued, her voice sharp now. There was no pretense of kindness left. "But the rest of the house reflects my taste. If you don't like it, you're welcome to find your own place." She held my gaze, daring me to challenge her, daring the housekeeper to argue with the master of the house. I thought about the power of attorney I'd signed 18 months ago. I thought about the legal documents I'd never read carefully, trusting Victoria blindly when she said it was just to help manage things while I grieved. I thought about the fact that my name was still on the deed to this house, or at least, I hope to God it was. And I thought about the terrifying reality that I had no idea what Victoria had actually done with those papers. "Fine," I said quietly. Victoria blinked, momentarily surprised. She'd been expecting a fight. "Take the chair," I continued, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "Do whatever you want." Her expression shifted to something almost triumphant. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this." I nodded and walked away. Behind me, I heard her instructing the designer to schedule the movers for Saturday morning. I didn't go back to the book club. I didn't go to my attic room. I walked out to the garden, the one Eleanor and I had planted together, the one with the red maples that turned brilliant in the fall. And I stood there until the sun went down, the guests left, and the house went completely quiet. I wasn't letting Victoria take the chair because I believed her lies. I wasn't backing down because I thought she was right. I was letting her take the chair because I needed time. Time to think, time to plan. Time to call the one person who could tell me the absolute truth about what I'd signed, what rights I still had, and how I was going to take my life back. The next morning, while Victoria was at the gym, and Kenneth was nursing a hangover in what used to be my office, I went into the small storage closet under the attic stairs. It was the one place they never bothered to look. I pulled out the lockbox where I'd kept Eleanor's important papers, our marriage certificate, the original deed to the house, and the estate documents. I sat on the floor and made the phone call I should have made 2 years ago. Hayes and Associates, how may I direct your call? Patricia Hayes, please, I said, my voice remarkably steady. Tell her Theodore Sterling is calling. It's urgent. Patricia Hayes had been our family attorney for 20 years. She'd drawn up the original paperwork when Eleanor and I started our firm. She knew every intimate detail of our finances. When she came on the line, her voice was sharp with immediate concern. Theodore, it's been over a year. Are you all right? I didn't waste time on pleasantries. Patricia, I need to know exactly what a power of attorney entails. Victoria told me last night that because I signed it, she owns my house and has total control over my property. Patricia's sharp intake of breath was audible over the line. Theodore, listen to me carefully. A power of attorney absolutely does not transfer ownership. It gives someone the authority to manage finances, pay bills, and handle administrative transactions on your behalf. But the house, your massive pension, your investment assets, they are still yours. 100%, unless you explicitly signed a deed transfer, which requires notarization and county filing. That estate is legally yours. Relief flooded through me, swiftly followed by a cold, blinding fury. Victoria had been lying. She'd been using my grief and my ignorance against me for months. There's something else, Patricia said, her tone shifting to professional urgency. If Victoria is trying to control your assets this aggressively and actively lying to you about property ownership, she might be laying the groundwork for a conservatorship. A what? A conservatorship. It's when a court declares someone mentally incapacitated and appoints a conservator to take over their life completely. She'd need medical evidence to prove you're declining, but Theodore, if she's already rewriting history, gaslighting you, and isolating you from your friends, this could be her endgame. You need to get a full medical evaluation immediately. Cognitive tests, psychiatric assessment, something irrefutable that proves you are of perfectly sound mind. And document everything she does. I already am, I said, looking at the small notebook I'd kept hidden in the box. Good, and Theodore, be extremely careful. If she realizes you're building a case against her, she might accelerate her plans. Over the next few days, I became a ghost by choice. I moved quietly, observed everything, and listened at closed doors. I used my hidden journal to document every dismissive comment, every manipulation, and every financial transaction I could access. That's when I discovered the withdrawals, logging into my primary bank account, which Victoria thought I'd forgotten the password for. I saw the bleeding. $75,000 drained from the household account over 6 months. $53,000 from my high-yield savings. Victoria's digital signature authorized every single transfer. I was reviewing the printed bank statements in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. 2 men stood on the porch. They wore tailored suits that looked expensive, but they didn't look like salesmen or executives. They had the hard, flat eyes of men who solved problems for a living. Good afternoon, the tall one said politely. We're looking for Kenneth. Is he home? Who's asking? I asked, keeping the door partially closed. Friends of Frankie. The leaner man smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Kenneth knows who we are. I heard footsteps behind me. Kenneth had come down the stairs, but stopped dead halfway. He had gone completely pale, frozen like a rabbit in headlights. Gentlemen, Kenneth said, his voice tight and high. This isn't a good time. Frankie thinks it's a great time, the tall one said, stepping slightly closer to the door. 6 months is a very long time to wait for $1.5 million. Kenneth's eyes darted frantically to me, then back to the men. I'm working on it. Tell Frankie I'm working on it. He knows I'm good for it. Nice place. By the way, the lean one said, looking past me at the marble foyer and the sweeping staircase. Maybe sell something, speed things up. The tall one reached into his breast pocket and handed Kenneth a pristine white business card. 2 weeks, Kenneth. Frankie's generosity has limits. After they turned and walked back down the driveway, Kenneth stood gripping the banister, looking ashen. I closed the door quietly. $1.5 million, I said, my voice deadpan. How? Poker. Sports betting. His voice was hollow. I thought I could win it back. It got out of control fast, and Victoria knows. He nodded slowly. She's been using your accounts to pay it down. We've given them $400,000 so far to keep them from breaking my legs. $400,000 from my money, stolen by my own daughter to pay off loan sharks. She told me you'd signed everything over, Kenneth said, his voice cracking with genuine panic. That you wanted her to manage it? She told me it was basically her money now. She'd lied to both of us. I saw true fear in Kenneth's eyes. Victoria had him trapped just as securely as she'd trapped me. His cage was built from massive gambling debt and the threat of physical violence. Mine was built from grief and isolation. That night, unable to sleep, I heard hushed, frantic voices downstairs. I crept out of my attic room and stood in the shadows at the top of the staircase. I don't care if he's suspicious. Victoria's voice floated up, sharp, cold, and utterly ruthless. If he knows about the accounts, we move faster. Move faster. How? Kenneth sounded panicked, probably thinking about Frankie's men. The conservatorship. I've already talked to a lawyer. We file next month. I'll get testimony about his behavior. Memory lapses, confusion, inappropriate anger. I'll stage the attic to look like a hoarding situation. Once the court appoints me as his legal conservator, everything is legally mine. The house, the investments, all of it, Victoria snapped. And Frankie gets his money, we sell this place, downsize, and we're clear, Victoria. He's your father. He's an obstacle, she replied without a second of hesitation. I stood in the darkness, my hand gripping the wooden railing, so hard my knuckles popped. My own daughter. She was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, to forcibly seize everything I had spent 40 years building, to erase my agency and my life completely, just to cover up her husband's criminal debts. I walked silently back to my room, pulled out my hidden journal, and wrote down every single word I had just heard. Then, I looked at the evidence I'd been meticulously gathering. The bank statements, proving the $75,000 in theft, recorded audio snippets on my phone, photographs of the house before Victoria had erased our family from it. Patricia had warned me Victoria was accelerating. She wasn't just accelerating. She was preparing a nuclear strike, which meant I had to move faster than her tomorrow. I needed two things. First, an ironclad medical evaluation proving I was of brilliantly sound mind. Second, a way to publicly and legally destroy her credibility before she could file her fraudulent petition. Tomorrow, the war truly began. The morning after overhearing Victoria's conservatorship plan, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I left the house without telling anyone. I walked out the back door, cutting through the gardens Eleanor and I had planted, and called an Uber from the beach access road half a mile away. Victoria couldn't track my car if I didn't drive it. Kenneth was likely nursing another hangover, and Victoria was at her corporate office, playing the role of the successful, put-together executive. No one would notice the housekeeper was gone. Dr. Alan Rodriguez's office was located in a sleek glass tower near Central Park. Patricia had specifically recommended him. He was a neuropsychologist with an impeccable, unassailable reputation, the kind of expert witness whose testimony courts treated as gospel. Mr. Sterling, he said, shaking my hand firmly. He was a professional in his mid-50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Patricia explained the urgency of your situation. We'll be extremely thorough today. Cognitive function tests, memory assessments, executive function evaluations, and a full psychiatric screening. It should take about 3 to 4 hours. Take whatever time you need, I replied, sitting down. I have nothing but time. He led me through a grueling battery of tests, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, clock drawing, complex word recall, spatial pattern recognition. He asked me to count backwards from 100 by sevens. He showed me sequences of images and asked me to recall them 30 minutes later. Throughout the evaluation, he questioned me about my life, my work, and my recent experiences. I didn't hold back. I told him about Eleanor's sudden death. I told him about designing the estate, about Victoria systematically erasing our history from the walls, about the power of attorney she'd manipulated me into signing. I told him about the stolen $75,000, Kenneth's massive gambling debt, the loan sharks arriving at the door, and the conversation I'd overheard about her plan to file for a conservatorship to steal my remaining assets. Doctor, Rodriguez took meticulous notes, his expression remaining neutral and profoundly professional throughout. Finally, after nearly 4 hours of intense evaluation, he set down his pen and folded his hands on the desk. "Mr. Sterling, I'm going to be completely frank with you," he said, his voice steady. "Your cognitive function is exceptional. You scored in the 98th percentile for your age group. And frankly, that's compared to healthy individuals, not the general population. Your memory is razor sharp, your executive reasoning is entirely intact, you show absolutely no signs whatsoever of dementia, Alzheimer's, severe depression, or any other condition that would even remotely support a conservatorship claim." The relief that flooded through me was so powerful, I had to grip the armrests of the leather chair to steady myself. "I will prepare a comprehensive, legally binding report," he continued, his tone reassuring. "If anyone attempts to question your mental capacity in a court of law, this documentation will be absolute, ironclad proof to the contrary. You are, by every clinical and psychiatric measure, of completely sound mind." "Thank you, doctor," I managed to say, the tightness in my chest finally beginning to ease. "Patricia also asked me to note something else in my official report," he added, looking at me directly. "The situation you've described, the forced isolation, the financial exploitation, the emotional manipulation by family members. These are textbook, classic signs of severe elder abuse. If this goes to court, I will document that as well. What she is doing is not just unethical, it is abuse." I left his office an hour later with a thick sealed envelope containing the medical report, my absolute legal armor. I walked through Central Park for the first time in 3 years. The fall leaves were turning brilliant shades of gold and red. Eleanor would have loved this view. I sat on a quiet bench overlooking the water, pulled out a burner phone I'd purchased that morning, and called Patricia. "I have the report," I said when she answered. 98th percentile, no signs of impairment whatsoever." "Excellent," Patricia said, the relief evident in her voice. "That's your legal armor. Keep it somewhere Victoria absolutely cannot access." "I will, but there's something else." I took a deep breath, the cold autumn air filling my lungs. "Victoria announced she's hosting a very important dinner party next week. She's trying to impress an executive named Charles Morrison. Apparently he's a CEO, and she wants a senior executive VP position at his company. She thinks securing this job will give her the leverage and salary she needs." There was a very long pause on the other end of the line. "Charles Morrison," Patricia said slowly, her voice dropping. "Theodore, do you remember a young architect you mentored about 25 years ago? A brilliant kid just out of Columbia? Worked directly under you on the Harbor Towers project." The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. Charles, he'd been 24 years old, eager, intensely talented, and hungry to learn. I'd spent 2 years teaching him in everything I knew: design principles, client management, how to navigate the brutal politics of running an architectural firm. He'd called me his mentor, his inspiration. We'd lost touch after I sold my company, and he moved heavily into commercial real estate development. "That Charles?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. "That's Charles Morrison. He's the CEO of Morrison Development now, one of the biggest real estate firms on the East Coast. If Victoria is trying to impress him for an executive role, and she has absolutely no idea that he knows you." I could hear the legal and strategic calculation running through Patricia's mind. It mirrored my own. "Find me his private number," I said, my voice dropping to a low, determined octave. "Theodore, what exactly are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Victoria is planning to have me legally declared incompetent so she can steal my home and my millions to pay off a loan shark. I'm thinking she spent 3 years treating me like a housekeeper and erasing me from my own life. And I'm thinking that next week she's going to introduce me to her boss as the caretaker, just like she did at her book club." I gripped the burner phone tightly, and I want to make sure Charles knows exactly who I am before that happens. I want him to know everything. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "I'll get you his number. But Theodore, once you make that call, there's no going back. You're forcing the issue. You're choosing war. Victoria chose war the day she tried to throw Eleanor's chair into a storage unit," I said coldly. "I'm just finally deciding to fight back." That evening, I returned to the estate. Victoria was sitting in the living room on her laptop, obsessively planning the dinner party. She barely glanced up when I walked past. "Theodore, you'll need to serve that night," she said absently, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Cocktails at 7, dinner at 8, and wear something presentable. Mr. Morrison is a very important man. I can't afford any embarrassments, of course," I said smoothly. I went upstairs to my attic room and pulled out the sealed medical report. 98th percentile, completely sound mind, legal armor against conservatorship. I tucked it securely into the hidden lockbox in my closet, along with the journal, the bank statements showing her theft, and the audio recordings. Then, I looked at the piece of paper Patricia had texted me earlier, a phone number. 10 digits that could obliterate my daughter's career. I had 1 week before the dinner party, 1 week to decide whether to simply expose Victoria's lies privately or to orchestrate something far more devastating. That night, I chose revenge. Calling Charles was a massive gamble. 25 years was a lifetime. And people change. He might not remember me fondly. He might not care. He might be just as ambitious and ruthlessly cutthroat as Victoria and choose to side with his aspiring executive instead of an old man. But I had to try. Victoria had spent 3 years making me invisible in my own home, and I was about to remind her exactly who I was. 3 days after getting the medical report, I dialed Charles's private number from my burner phone while sitting in my truck in a grocery store parking lot. "This is Charles Morrison, Charles. It's Theodore Sterling. I don't know if you remember me, but 25 years ago, Mr. Theodore?" His voice cracked slightly with genuine shock. "Is it really you? My God, I heard you'd gone into a nursing home. Someone in the industry said you had developed severe dementia." Victoria, she'd been spreading lies, preparing the ground for her conservatorship claim across her professional network. "I'm not in a nursing home, Charles," I said, my voice hardening. "I'm living with my daughter, and I need to tell you exactly what's been happening." I told him everything. The manipulated power of attorney, the erasure from my own house, the $75,000 stolen to pay off a loan shark, and Victoria's impending plan to have me declared incompetent so she could steal my millions. And I told him about the upcoming dinner party, about how she planned to use him to advance her career, and how she intended to introduce me to her guests as the hired help. "She calls you the caretaker?" Charles's voice shook with sudden fierce fury. "You are Theodore Sterling. You gave me my first real chance when no other firm would even look at a kid fresh out of Columbia. You taught me everything I know about design and integrity. I've spent 25 years trying to live up to the standard you set." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was dangerously calm. "Mr. Theodore, tell me exactly what you want me to do. Come to the dinner party," I instructed. "Act completely normal. Let Victoria play her game. When the moment is right, I'll give you a signal." Now, 5 days later, that moment had finally arrived. The dining room gleamed with expensive crystal and candlelight. Victoria had pulled out all the stops, hired a private bartender, an extravagant catering menu, even a pianist playing softly in the background. 8 influential guests would effectively decide her promotion tonight. "Theodore," Victoria hissed, pulling me into the kitchen just before 7:00 p.m. Her eyes were manic with ambition. "You stay in the background, you serve drinks, you clear plates silently, and you do not speak to the guests unless directly spoken to. Do not embarrass me tonight. My entire career is riding on this." "Of course," I replied, my face a mask of subservience. Kenneth stood near the fireplace in the living room, looking miserable and incredibly jumpy. He'd been terrified since the loan sharks visited. Victoria firmly believed this dinner would solve everything. Charles Morrison as an ally meant bigger corporate deals, massive bonuses, and enough money to finally pay off Frankie. Guests began arriving at 7. Victoria seamlessly transformed into the perfect, gracious hostess, charming and radiant in her black cocktail dress. I moved quietly through the room with a tray of champagne, utterly invisible to the people laughing and chatting. Charles Morrison arrived at 7:30. He was taller than I remembered, with gray at the temples and wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. His eyes scanned the room and found mine immediately. 1 second of intense connection. just long enough for me to see the barely contained anger beneath his professional smile. Then he looked away. "Mr. Morrison." Victoria swept forward, her smile dazzling. "Thank you so much for coming. The pleasure is entirely mine," Charles replied smoothly. "You have an absolutely beautiful home, Victoria. Thank you. Kenneth and I bought it 5 years ago and completely renovated it from the ground up." The lie rolled off her tongue with effortless ease. She guided him into the living room while I refilled glasses at the bar. A woman wearing an extravagant string of pearls glanced between Charles, me, and Victoria. "Is this your father?" she asked kindly, gesturing toward me. Victoria's smile didn't falter for a microsecond. "Oh no, this is Theodore, our caretaker. He helps around the house." Charles's jaw tightened instantly. His hand gripped his champagne flute so hard I thought the crystal might shatter. "Your caretaker," he repeated, his voice carefully, dangerously neutral. "Yes, he's been with us for a few years now," Victoria said, utterly dismissive. She turned to me. "Theodore, could you check on the appetizers?" I retreated to the kitchen. Behind me, Victoria laughed, steering Charles toward the other guests, launching directly into her practiced pitch about her visionary ideas for the executive VP role. She had absolutely no idea whose side he was really on. Dinner was called. At 8, the guests took their seats. Victoria sat at the head of the table, Charles at her right as the guest of honor, and Kenneth sat across, looking pale, anxious, and slightly sweating. I served the first course, perfectly seared scallops. Everyone complimented the food that Victoria hadn't even cooked. I moved silently around the table, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates. Charles caught my eye once. I gave the smallest, imperceptible shake of my head. Not yet. Patience. Victoria needed to feel completely safe, confident, and triumphant. She needed to fully believe she'd won before the floor fell out from under her. Dessert was served. Expensive port was poured. Victoria was mid-story about her latest successful real estate deal when I finally caught Charles's attention and gave a slight nod toward the kitchen. He understood perfectly. I set down my silver tray, untied the white serving apron, and walked into the kitchen. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't Theodore the caretaker. I was Theodore Sterling, architect, builder, and mentor. I adjusted my silk tie, smoothed my shirt, and took a deep, steadying breath. When I walked back into that dining room, everything had changed. Not the room. The guests were still laughing, still holding their port glasses, but me. I stood differently. I moved differently. I wasn't serving anymore. Charles Morrison saw me first. He set down his glass and rose slowly, deliberately to his feet. One by one, the other guests noticed. Conversations trailed off into awkward silence. Victoria looked at Charles, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Mr. Morrison, is something wrong?" Charles smiled, not the polite, professional smile he'd worn all evening. "Something much warmer, something real. Before we go any further this evening, I want to introduce everyone to a living legend," Charles said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent dining room. He gestured directly toward me. "This is Theodore Sterling. And what Victoria hasn't told you is that 25 years ago, this man gave me my first real chance in architecture, when no other firm would even grant me an interview." Victoria's face went completely, shockingly white. "He is not a caretaker," Charles continued, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "He is one of the most brilliant architects of his generation. He designed the harbor towers, the riverside complex, and half the magnificent skyline you can see from this very window." Every single head in the room turned toward me. In fact, Charles added, delivering the final, crushing blow, "This stunning house we're sitting in? He designed and built it 30 years ago with his late wife, Eleanor." The woman in the pearls looked absolutely stricken. She'd asked earlier if I was Victoria's father and had accepted the caretaker lie without question. Victoria recovered quickly, though her eyes were wide with panic. She forced a brittle, high-pitched laugh. "Charles, I think there's been some confusion. Dad, you're embarrassing our guests." She turned to the table, her smile desperate. "My father, he sometimes gets a little confused. I call him our caretaker, as a term of endearment. Because he helps around the house, and we love having him here." "A term of endearment," I said quietly. It was the very first time I'd spoken at that dinner table in 3 years. Everyone went dead still. I pulled out my phone. Not the burner, but my old iPhone. I scrolled to the audio file from a week ago, the one I'd recorded when I overheard her on the phone. I pressed play and turned the volume all the way up. Victoria's own voice filled the dining room, crystal clear and damning. "He's useful, honestly, free childcare, and he keeps the house spotless. The old man already signed all the papers over to me anyway. Why wouldn't we keep him?" The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Victoria's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the color violently draining from her face. Kenneth had gone perfectly rigid in his chair, staring down at his plate like it might offer an escape hatch. Charles set down his wineglass very carefully. When he spoke, his voice was ice-cold and purely professional. "Victoria, I think we need to have a very serious conversation about ethics, honesty, and integrity before we ever discuss the executive vice president position. Perhaps we should schedule that for another time, a much, much later time." The message was brutally clear. She was completely out of consideration. The dinner party dissolved quickly and awkwardly after that. Guests made hasty excuses, thanked Victoria with forced, stiff politeness, and practically ran for the door. A few gave me deeply sympathetic, apologetic looks as they passed. The woman in pearls stopped and said quietly, "I am so sorry. I should have known." Kenneth disappeared upstairs, probably to his man cave, with a bottle of the expensive whiskey he'd bought with my money. Charles was the last to leave. He shook my hand warmly at the door. "Mr. Theodore, if you need anything, legal support, a place to stay, anything at all, you call me immediately." "Thank you, Charles. I mean it. You changed my life. It's about time I returned the favor," he said with a smile and walked out into the night. After the front door clicked shut, the house fell deathly silent. I stood in the grand foyer, feeling a strange mix of vindication and exhaustion. "You've destroyed me!" Victoria's scream echoed from the living room. I turned to find her standing there, mascara streaking down her face, shaking with absolute, unhinged rage. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? That was my career, my future. Everything I've worked for. Everything you've worked for," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Or everything you've stolen. I gave you a home. I took care of you when your mother died, and you made me your servant. You erased me from my own house. You tried to steal everything Eleanor and I spent 40 years building." "It should have been mine," she shrieked. "You were too grief-stricken to manage it. Someone had to take control. So you did it with lies and manipulation. And by paying off loan sharks with my pension." Victoria's face twisted into something ugly. Her voice dropped to a cold, dangerous whisper. "Fine, let's talk about consequences. Dad, if you continue down this path, if you keep fighting me, I will make absolutely sure you never see Jackson and Noah again." My blood ran cold. "That's right," she smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "I'll take them across the country, California, maybe Oregon, somewhere far away where you'll never find them, and I'll make sure they forget you ever existed, just like I erased you from these walls." I couldn't speak. The grandchildren were the only bright spot I'd had in the past 3 years. Jackson's drawings under my door, Noah's questions about architecture, teaching them both to appreciate the ocean view from the house I'd built. "You're using innocent children as weapons," I said, my voice barely steady. "I'm protecting my family from a bitter, unstable old man who's trying to destroy their mother," Victoria said, her tone calculating. "That's exactly what I'll tell the court. Anyway. And who do you think they'll believe? The successful corporate executive with young children to protect? Or the elderly father with documented concerns about his mental state?" She turned and walked away, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. "Think about that before you make your next move, Dad." That night, lying in my narrow attic bed, I listened as Victoria made panicked phone calls. Through the thin walls, I heard her instructing her lawyer to file the emergency conservatorship petition immediately. She was going nuclear. She was willing to use my grandsons as both weapon and shield. But she didn't know I was ready. 3 days later, the official papers arrived. Victoria Sterling was petitioning Manhattan County Court for an emergency conservatorship, claiming I was mentally incompetent and a danger to myself. The following Tuesday, I walked up the courthouse steps, dressed in my sharpest charcoal gray suit. Patricia Hayes met me at the door. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I'm about to fight for my life," I replied. Judge Martha Brennan presided over the hearing. Victoria's high-priced lawyer painted a heartbreaking picture of a devoted daughter watching her father's tragic decline. Victoria took the stand, weeping convincingly, spinning lies about me leaving the stove on and forgetting her children's names. She claimed I was paranoid, making wild accusations about stolen money. It was a masterful performance. Then, Kenneth took the stand. He walked up looking like a man heading to the gallows. He wouldn't look at me. Victoria's lawyer asked if he believed I needed a conservator. Kenneth gripped the rail, his knuckles white. He looked at Victoria, who gave him a sharp, warning glare. But Kenneth broke. "No," Kenneth said, his voice cracking loudly in the silent courtroom. "No, he doesn't need a conservator. Theodore is completely competent. There's nothing wrong with him." Victoria bolted upright. "Kenneth." "She made me lie," Kenneth shouted, tears spilling down his face. "She told me what to say. She threatened me, said if I didn't help her, she'd leave me alone with the loan sharks. I can't do this anymore." "I'm sorry, Theodore. I'm so sorry. You were right about everything. The gambling, the debt, Victoria stealing your money. It's all true." The courtroom erupted. Judge Brennan hammered her gavel. "Mr. Sterling, are you saying you committed perjury?" she demanded. "Yes, Your Honor. I lied. Victoria told me to." Judge Brennan's face turned to stone as she looked at my daughter. "Miss Sterling, I have heard enough. This petition is immediately denied. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate investigation by the District Attorney's Office into elder abuse and financial exploitation." She turned to me. "Mr. Sterling, this court finds you to be of sound mind and fully capable of managing your own affairs." Then, she delivered the final blow to Victoria. "Miss Sterling, I am issuing a temporary order requiring you to vacate Mr. Sterling's property within 72 hours. You are not to remove any items except personal belongings. You are not to access his financial accounts. We are adjourned." Victoria stood there, shaking with fury and disbelief. As she stormed out of the courtroom, dragging my confused grandsons by the hand, she threw one last look over her shoulder. "You won, Dad," she hissed venomously. "I hope you're happy in that house, because you're going to die alone in it." I watched her drive away with Jackson and Noah. I had my house back. My assets were protected. But, watching my grandsons disappear down the street, I realized winning the battle didn't mean I'd won the war. I had underestimated one thing. People always remember how you treated them. 3 weeks after Victoria took my grandsons away, my network began to activate, and we prepared for an entirely new kind of battle. The first call came from Charles Morrison. "Mr. Theodore, I heard what happened in court. I'm so sorry about your grandchildren. How can I help, Charles?" I asked, sitting in Eleanor's reading nook. Her velvet chair finally returned from storage. "You've already done more than enough just exposing her," he said. "I'm calling because Morrison Development is breaking ground on a massive mixed-use complex in Brooklyn next spring. I need a senior strategic advisor, someone who understands how to design spaces where lives can actually flourish." He paused. "The position pays $200,000 a year part-time. I need your expertise, Mr. Theodore. This isn't charity. This is business. For 3 years, I'd been treated as incompetent, useless, a burden to be hidden in an attic. And Charles was offering me meaningful work. Respect. I accept," I said quietly. Patricia called that afternoon with her own news. "I'm filing a petition for grandparent visitation rights. Under New York law, since you lived with them and formed strong bonds, and given Victoria's documented manipulation, we can win this." That evening, a private investigator I'd hired reported back. Victoria was renting a small condo in Jersey City. She had maxed out 2 credit cards. No firm would hire her because word of the conservatorship scandal had spread through the industry like wildfire. She was desperate. 2 weeks later, I sat across from Victoria in a New Jersey courtroom, fighting for my grandsons. Patricia presented the bank statements, showing the $400,000 Victoria had stolen. She showed the court that Victoria hadn't moved to New Jersey for her children's benefit. She'd fled to escape legal and social consequences. "This isn't about protecting children," Patricia told the judge. This is parental alienation. Miss Sterling is using her sons as weapons to punish their grandfather for refusing to be victimized by her financial exploitation. Kenneth took the stand again, sober. Clear-eyed, he testified against his ex-wife. Theodore is an excellent grandfather, Kenneth said quietly. Victoria used the children as bargaining chips. She told them their grandfather was sick and dangerous. It was a lie, all of it. The judge didn't hesitate. He granted me visitation rights. 2 afternoons per week and alternating holidays. When I walked into the supervised visitation center that Saturday and saw my 2 7-year-old grandsons running toward me, shouting, "Grandpa," I realized that some bonds are stronger than lies. 6 weeks later, I stood backstage at the National Architecture Awards. 500 industry leaders filled the ballroom. Kenneth had brought Jackson and Noah, sitting in the front row in matching tiny navy suits. Charles Morrison took the podium. The Lifetime Achievement Award recognizes an architect whose work has fundamentally shaped our profession, Charles announced. But beyond his designs, this man shaped people. He mentored a generation of architects, including me. Ladies and gentlemen, Theodore Sterling. The room erupted. 500 people rose to their feet. I walked onto the stage and accepted the Crystal Award, looking down at my grandsons, who were clapping so hard their little hands must have hurt. Legacy isn't what you build with your hands, I told the silent crowd. It's what you leave in people's hearts. It's choosing integrity over convenience. 3 days later, a photo of me and my grandsons holding the award appeared in Architectural Digest. That very afternoon, Victoria showed up at my door. She stood on the porch in jeans and a simple sweater. She looked small, defeated. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She walked through the foyer, taking in the restored house. The abstract art was gone. Eleanor's photographs were back. The house was mine again. "I saw the photo," she said, sinking onto the sofa where she used to entertain her book club. "I'm not here to fight, Dad. I'm desperate. I'm broke. The rent is 2 months overdue. I've applied to 20 firms, and no one will hire me." I felt no satisfaction, just a deep, hollow sadness. "I need help, Dad," she cried, wiping her eyes. "Not for me. For Jackson and Noah, they need stability. I just need 3 months of rent. Maybe $5,000 for expenses." There it was, not an apology, just money. "No," I said firmly, sitting in Eleanor's chair. "Dad, please. I won't give you money to continue the lifestyle that got you here. I won't enable the patterns that led you to steal from me, manipulate me, and try to have me declared incompetent. That's not fair. You're letting your grandchildren suffer because you're angry." "I see Jackson and Noah twice a week," I shot back, standing up. "I know they are fed, clothed, and safe. If they weren't, my lawyer would have emergency custody paper filed in 24 hours. You're not using them as leverage anymore, Victoria. That doesn't work, but I will help you differently. I will pay for therapy, real therapy. So you can figure out why you made these choices." She stared at me, calculating, searching for an angle. Then I saw the moment she realized she had absolutely nothing left. No house to threaten, no assets to steal, no legal avenue. Just herself, and the consequences she'd been running from. She walked to the door. "The boys ask about you constantly. I think they love you more than they love me." "That's not true, Victoria," I said quietly. "Children just want people who are honest, who show up. The therapy offer stands. Whenever you're ready." She drove away without answering. It took 6 months. 6 months of silence before Victoria finally took me up on the therapy. Then came a letter of apology, a real one, no excuses, just accountability. And then, 3 months after that, we met for coffee. She slid a check for $30,000 across the table. "I can't repay the $400,000 all at once," she said, her hands shaking. "But I'm working double shifts. I will repay every single cent. I need to prove to myself that I can pay my debts." I looked at my daughter. The arrogance was gone. In its place was a fragile, hard-won humility. "I'm proud of you for trying, Victoria. That takes courage." 3 years passed. Jackson turned 10. For the first time since everything fell apart, our entire family sat together in my backyard. The red maples were in full autumn color. Jackson and Noah were running through the garden with their friends. Charles Morrison was there. Patricia Hayes was there. Kenneth, completely sober for 4 years now, was there with his new girlfriend. He and Victoria had divorced, but they had become excellent co-parents. Victoria found me by the drink table and handed me an envelope. A check for $8,000. Last one, she said quietly, her eyes shining. I did it. You did, I smiled, pulling her into a hug, a real hug. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I went into my office. I sat at the mahogany desk and pulled out my favorite pen. The silver cufflinks Eleanor gave me rested beside the paper. I began to write a letter to Jackson and Noah to give them when they were older. At my daughter's dinner party, she introduced me as our caretaker. It cost me everything, my dignity, my home, nearly my relationship with you boys. But fighting back gave me something priceless, the knowledge that I could lose everything and still stand, that I could be humiliated and still rise. Kindness without boundaries isn't love, it's self-destruction. Compassion that costs you your self-respect isn't compassion, it's surrender. I forgave your mother, not because she deserved it initially, but because I needed peace. But I made her earn back my trust. Legacy isn't the empire you build or the house you own. It's whether your grandchildren remember you stood for something. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any stranger's cruelty. It comes from the people you raised, the ones who know exactly where to strike. I ignored every red flag because I was terrified of conflict, and it nearly destroyed me. If you recognize yourself in my early chapters, the people pleaser, the silent martyr, stop. Draw the line today. Your kindness is a gift, not a ransom. Protect it fiercely, because people who truly love you will never ask you to destroy yourself to prove your devotion. Your voice matters. Your boundaries matter. You matter. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts. What would you do if you were in my shoes, dealing with that level of pressure from your own family? If this story touched you, think about subscribing. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and never let anyone erase you from your own life.